Great. So, hello again and welcome everyone. Um, Thank you very much for joining us for the 13th edition of the Neurocognitive Linguistics Circle, um, or CELINE, as we call it by its Romanian acronym. Um, as many of you already know, or some of you already know, CELINE is a forum where we explore different aspects of human language. Um, just a second, there's some background noise. Maybe we can, a second. Yeah, let's just try to stay on mute when we're not speaking. That way, everything will be hearable. Okay, so as I was saying, maybe for those of you who are newer to CELINE, this is a forum where we try to explore different aspects of human language and how these aspects connect to the cognitive processes that support them. We all know that language is a product of the human brain, so it just makes sense that understanding language should go hand in hand with understanding how the mind and the brain works. Personally, I think that linguistics has kept itself separate from neuroscience for too long. And I really believe that real progress in understanding human language can only happen through a closer collaboration, let's say, between these two fields. And fortunately, actually, we are starting to see that happen in the last years. I also believe that this works the other way around. What we learn about linguistic structure can tell us a lot about how the mind operates, for example, when we speak or listen or read. So, in my view, neurocognitive linguistics is not just another linguistic theory, it's more of a way of linguistics. One that takes this idea of neurological plausibility very seriously. And that means that this perspective, this way of thinking means that the topic we discuss here at CELINE often overlap with areas traditionally explored in other disciplines, such as psychology, neurology, or education science. And that's also the case today. With today's presentation. Our guest is someone who's deeply interested in how the mind works and how language is processed, but always with a very practical goal in mind. And that is helping young students develop and improve their reading skills. Dr. Diana Schultz, because I'm talking about her, is a longtime and dear friend of mine and also fellow Romanian, but more importantly, she's a reading specialist at Delmar Elementary School and adjunct professor at Salisbury University in Maryland, USA. So, Diana, thank you so much for accepting our invitation and for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
A few words about Diana. She obtained her Doctor of Education title in Literacy Studies from Salisbury University in 2022, I think. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah, in 22. And today, actually, she will talk about her research, which focused on early literacy development. But before her presentation, she herself has invited a very special guest to introduce her work. And that guest is Dr. Koomi, professor at Salisbury University, and a specialist in literacy education, language development, and eye movement miscue analysis. Professor Kim obtained her PhD in language, reading, and culture in 2003 from the University of Arizona, where she worked with renowned experts in reading and literacy studies, Yetta and Ken Goodman. Her research focuses on understanding literacy using eye movement miscue analysis and has published extensively on the matter. I could go on, but talking with Diana, we agreed that we will shorten the presentation, the introduction of the two speakers, so that they can go ahead and present what they have to present. But should also mention that Professor Kim was Diana's PhD supervisor. So thank you very much, Professor Kim, for accepting Diana's invitation and for joining us today to support her presentation and to enrich our discussion with your expertise.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. So I'm so delighted to be here to talk about Diana's outstanding research. Thank you.
Yeah. Great, thank you. I have presented myself. This is the 13th edition, so please forgive me if I forgot. I'm Paul Buzila, your moderator. And without further ado, then let's begin. We'll start with Professor Kim's presentation titled Eye Movement Miscue Analysis, Insights into the Reading Process. And that will be followed by Dr. Schultz's talk titled Understanding the Early Literacy Development of Primary RTI Students Through the Application of Miscue Analysis. At the end, as always, we'll have some time for questions and discussion with the audience. But Diana, for example, told me that she has no problem. If you have any question during her presentation and you want to ask it, we can do that as well. So, Professor Kim, the floor is yours.
Okay, Paul, thank you very much for your kind introduction. Highly appreciate it. Thank you. So, I'm so delighted to talk about Dr. Diana Schultz's outstanding dissertation study using miscue analysis as a tool to understand how young children read, how they make meaning. So, Diana, if you don't mind flipping. So, overview of Dr. Schultz's dissertation study. As Paul noted, Diana's dissertation was completed in 2022. So there are 4 areas that she explored. Dr. Schultz conducted a study of primary grade students, including grades 1st through 3rd, who were receiving reading interventions, and teachers who had response to intervention students in their classrooms. So it was a classroom related study, but she conducted case studies that was bounded by her own RTI situation and her students and the program. So it was well-designed research. And also the study explored literacy developmental processes of young children using miscue analysis. And also at the same time, the study explored how RTI stands for response to intervention, students experienced and conceptualized reading through retrospective miscue analysis, which means that Diana invited her young students to talk about their miscue samples, how they were making sense. And then also, in addition, Diana looked at how miscue analysis impacted primary grade teachers' understanding of their RTI students' reading and literacy development. Thank you. And so why miscue analysis? So miscue analysis, the term miscue analysis was coined by Ken Goodman. The term miscue was used instead of the terminology errors or mistakes, because these differences are not simply mistakes, but rather windows into the reader's thinking and cognitive, metacognitions, all kinds of processes that we utilize as human beings. And also miscue analysis is a humanistic, reflexive, and culturally responsive teaching research tool. And then that'll be very evident once you hear Diana's specific samples and examples from her study. And also miscue analysis and retrospective miscue analysis foster meaning-centered, dialogic, and student-generated learning processes. Not just the product, but the processes are being valued. Also, it invites students, teachers, and researchers to explore and collaborate the ways in which their reading miscues reveal their search for meaning, and it's crucial for readers to develop a positive view of themselves as readers and thinkers and learners. And also, it helps readers revalue themselves, since readers explore their own reading processes with their teachers and or researchers, and thus becomes consciously aware of their strength about their meaning-making processes. Okay, so next slide, please. So I would like to talk about the theoretical framework of miscue analysis. Goodman used the socio-psycholinguistic model of reading. And actually, Ken, when I was taking Ken Goodman's course as a doctoral student, Ken shared with me, he spent one summer with Noam Chomsky to talk about his developing reading model. So Chomsky played an important role in developing this transactional socio-psycholinguistic reading model. So it's a model, reading model emphasizes that there is a universal reading process which allows readers to use their background knowledge and schema. So that's why we have schema theories and schema theory related models, and also multiple socio-cognitive reading strategies that readers use, including making predictions or making self-corrections, making inferences, and so on. And also, the language cueing systems play a very important role in this model, including semantic, syntactic, and then Michael Holliday talks about lexical grammar, right? We cannot simply look at words in isolation. The words need to be considered within a context using grammar, right? So that's why he uses the term lexical grammar. And of course, graphophonic cueing system, the surface features that we can hear, we can see. So multiple language cueing systems, as well as the socio-cognitive reading strategies the readers use to construct meaning, to navigate texts that they read. And it's important to underscore that reading is not a simple process of decoding. As Paul was saying, like in neuroscience, it's revealing how it is important to contextualize learning because our brains are constantly trying to make sense. And also Ken Goodman says it's a dynamic and complex socio-psycholinguistic process. And then reading is not just simply decoding, but perception plays a very important role, based on the neural science and the neurolinguistics, because we see what we know, as Piaget talks about. Okay, we don't always see what we're looking at, but we are transacting with the text and transacting with the world that we, explore. Okay, the next slide, please. So Diana and I were talking about maybe that would be good to share an example of Emma too, because miscue analysis has been evolving so much. So these days, a lot of us, including Diana and myself, you can see that I am Movement Miscue Analysis Lab here at Salisbury University. And Diana has conducted the miscue analysis as well as Emma studies for her pilot study and for her dissertation, right? Because teacher participants that Diana worked with had the opportunity to explore Emma studies. So over here, Diana's beautiful picture here in the Emma lab. So we used the iLink camera, pan tilt camera to gather eye movement data sources. This camera is so fast. In 1 second, up to 1,000 exposures. Can you imagine that? The camera can make 1,000 exposures, but for our research, we use up to 500 exposures. Okay, next one, please. And then I just want to talk about what Emma is. Emma is by tracking eye movements of readers while we record their oral reading. So there are like multiple layers of data sources we can gather, and we produce a very powerful, amazing database for the study of readers' construction of meaning, what is actually going on. So it's not necessarily reading comprehension, but as Ken Goodman calls it, reading comprehending processes. And then not just Ken Goodman, but Jette Goodman also. They really investigate the reading comprehending processes, what's actually happening when we're reading. And also the data is both a continuous record of the eye fixations and movements over an entire text and a continuous record of the oral reading of that text and the miscue readers produce. So usually psychology research, people use like a word level or maybe phrase level, reading experiments, but we are very proud that we use entire text. So that's why our data sets are very, very complicated and sophisticated to analyze, as Diana and I know fully, right? And also the merged research methodology, eye movement and muscular analysis, and then we coined the term as EMMA, was brought together to study how perception, okay, neuroscience also talks about perception, right? How perception is related to comprehension as well as comprehending in reading or language process overall. And okay, next one. So we'd like to share with you one real sample, okay? So you'll see a blue dot. Blue dot represents this Ben, fifth graders oral reading. So please follow the blue dot and also listen to Ben's reading. And also I invite all of you to write down what you notice about this fifth grader's oral reading, okay? In relation to his eye movement. Okay, Diana, please.
It was definitely really exciting since Dunlin Stathis, an Eagle Scout from Troop 154 in Golden Bridge, New York. I thought I'd have a good time. I had such a good time. At the end of the training session, there were 2 questions for Dunlin and other scouts to answer. Are you physically strong enough to climb the wall? Are you mentally tough enough to stay calm 30 feet above the ground?
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. So did you notice anything about the eye movement or oral reading? Okay, so we'd like to share with you what we noticed. Okay, so Diana, next slide, please. So here is the eye movement representing the movements using the software. Both, Diana and I have used this, right, to really understand how readers are navigating. So here we can see the sampling patterns, right? As you can see, and the larger circles represent longer fixation time, duration, and the smaller circles represent shorter duration. And each circle is called the fixation point. And the lines you see between the circles are called the saccades, so that we can see the pattern. And then in addition to that, you can see the numbers. And then we're finding out. So this Ben was sampling the text in a dynamic manner, as you can see. And he regressed a number of times. Regression meaning he went back. But not in terms of oral reading, but his eyes regressed. And also, it's very important, not every single word was fixated by Ben. And the content words, which carry meaning, were fixated more than function words. Because again, Michael Holliday talks about the lexical grammar, right? So again, we use, certain cues to make meaning. It's a very selective and dynamic process. And so that's why he fixated more on the content words than the function words. Okay, so next slide, please. And then one specific example I'd like to share with you was that he omitted the determinant, the. Okay, so but with using the eye movement data, we can actually investigate how his brain was processing this, how he was perceiving what. So here you can see he did not say the word that, but. Okay, so can you take a look at number 14, 15, 16? He fixated on the word doubling here, and then he went to 15, right? And then regressed, and he went back 16. He went back, he regressed, and the omitted word that is here. He did not orally pronounce, said that word that, but then his brain actually decided to go back and self-monitor this area. But it's very important. He never read the word aloud, but his brain, his eye movement data shows that he wasn't simply ignoring the word that. So this shows us his metacognition, metacognitive processes, and the dynamic nature of the reading. Okay, the next one, please.
So, Koomi, if you allow us, since you allowed us to interrupt.
Sure, of course.
We have a question. Stephen asked, maybe Stephen, you want to formulate it aloud, because it's about what you've just presented.
So I love this. I love this research, but I'm just curious because I'm trying to find I'm trying to find the distinction between this research with the children versus, for instance, so
Great.
my question is, how is it different than, let's say, an adult reader who is reading for maybe new text for the first time? As example, like a person who is maybe just reading for fun or reading a difficult book, or maybe even like a person that's started law school and they're reading very hard text, or particular adult readers who are ESL learners. How is this different than maybe a child's, I guess we would say, like how their eyes move?
Great question. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, first of all, text matters, right? So how we navigate. So when we conduct this, and then we have conducted in so many different areas, working with adult readers and early readers. But yes, usually developing readers or immersion readers tend to make more fixations than highly proficient readers. But then we have never seen any readers who actually fixated on each letter or each word. So that's important. And then text matters. Even highly proficient readers, when they're asked to read science text, which we have done that in the Emma Lab, they tend to make more fixations when adult readers are navigating more challenging text. But then both adults and younger readers who are navigating some text that they're interested in, that they could easily navigate, they tend to make fewer fixation points. So, but really context matters and text matters.
So again, I find this so fascinating. So, because I have a 4-year-old, so I'm just curious.
Yes.
So when you say, I'm just trying. Obviously, this is very complex, but when you say fixation, there's more fixation in the youth reader because how they're really trying to interpret the text, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Because in general, young readers who are learning to read, right? So they're learning to really work with the graphophonic cueing systems as well as the meaning-making strategies. So they're trying to really navigate the text more closely than highly proficient readers. So those aspects that we're learning. And then Diana conducted her pilot study with the young readers. And that was a similar patterns, right? So we were able to identify Diana, right?
Yes.
Is that true? Yeah.
Yes, and young readers, it's not just our studies, but Emma research shows that they're more text focused. So young readers focus on print more than all the other cueing systems that they can use. So while the process is universal, it's different. It's different for more proficient readers who, I think, Koomi, correct me if I remember the statistics correctly, that proficient readers only fixate on about 70% of the words, while younger readers tend to be more word focused.
Yep. Then at the same time, our Emma research shows it's not just a one language cueing system, but then readers actually integrating semantic, syntactic, and pragmatic cueing systems to construct meaning of what they read. And then that aligns with the linguistics, right? That functional linguistics, especially Michael Holliday talks about.
So I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. This will be my last question. I'll
Sure.
shut up. But so for instance, I notice Ben, when I'm reading him like Frog and Toad, so he always asks, he asked me like, what is the title of the chapter or this and that.
Good.
He always asks the title of the chapter, so I'll tell him, okay, this is whatever, flying a kite, and I'll point flying a kite, and then like when we go to the beginning of the chapter, I will read to him then the caption again. But I do notice, obviously, I'm not a machine, so I can't tell what he's looking at. It seems like he's trying to understand what this like text may be about by reading that caption. Is that kind of like what's going on here-ish? They fixate on those words.
It's difficult to say because you're talking about two different types of text, right? Because text matters, but then research shows it's important. that people use multiple cues, right? But then research, but our eye movement research shows that the readers oftentimes fixate and focus on the text, as Diana shared earlier. But then at the same time, picture cues or image cues were being utilized too. But then one thing that's important about emergent readers is sometimes we make this assumption, or they're only using picture cues. But our research is showing those emergent readers are not that simple. They're using multiple cues. They're using print cues as well as picture cues, to navigate text in a very strategic manner.
And Stephen, I think what you're noticing about Finn, I know you've been reading to him ever since he was born. You're noticing his awareness of text features. Initially, he learned how to turn the pages, then he learned how to look at pictures, and now he's becoming more focused on print.
Yeah.
So I think what you're noticing is his awareness of the different information that a young reader can have on a page.
Right.
Which for him developed naturally and by being exposed to text and reading and stories and picture books.
Great.
For a lot of the students in schools and in reading pedagogy, it's important for us to sometimes explicitly teach those things that have not developed naturally for everybody and that develop differently for each child.
Right. Yeah. But it's so exciting to learn from emergent readers, how they become readers, right? By observing. Okay. So thank you for that question. And then I just want to really highlight Diana's research study before Diana starts her presentation. So I learned so much from her study about young readers and the power of mystery analysis, how Diana utilized mystery analysis, that young readers shifted away from a decoding or word-centric stance to a more holistic and a comprehensive, stance in terms of meaning-making processes. Also, Diana's study beautifully shows that how we need to create opportunities for young readers to talk about their reading experiences, and that relates to Stephen's comments too, right? So creating authentic opportunities to talk about their meaning-making processes. And also the notion of, so that readers can gain confidence and revalue themselves as readers and thinkers and learners. And the young readers integrated, it was very evident, right? How young readers integrated all the language cueing systems as well as the socio-cognitive reading strategies to make sense of what they read. So it's really important. It's not just phonics or decoding. It's more complex than that. Because here in the United States, currently we have the science of reading model, which is translated into the pedagogy. And it tends to focus on the sub-skills and the phonics, but it should not be the case. It should be more comprehensively fostered. And also young readers' substitutions, repetitions, omissions, insertions, and self-corrections are indicators that affirm reading as a holistic and dynamic and non-linear making processes. And also young readers and their teachers work together to, revalue themselves as readers and learners and meaning makers. Because, based on Diana's study, teachers started learning more about themselves as readers at the same time while they were working with young children. The more we know about ourselves as readers and thinkers and meaning makers, the better we can teach. And the next slide, please. And then from Dr. Schultz's outstanding study, as researchers and educators, we can learn a number of things, including how we need to value and integrate readers' prior knowledge and experiences, the schema. And mystery analysis shows as how we must go beyond the issues surrounding standard English usage to support linguistically and socioculturally diverse learners. And also self-correction, omission, substitution, and repetitions, these sociocognitive strategies, they have important implications for teachers and reading instructions. And these strategies need to be understood and accepted in meaningful and authentic reading literacy practices and research too. And then teachers should discuss with readers when such strategies are most helpful during authentic conversations about texts. And I learned so much about, from Diana's study, that teachers should invite readers to explore their miscues and reading strategies. And then next slide, please. And if you're interested in Emma, we have an emmaforum.org, the website. You can find some research studies. And then I'm going to be emailing Diana maybe 2 studies in relation to Emma studies. One study is looking at young reader. One study is looking at maybe college readers' reading process. And then maybe Diana can send those studies to Paul. And if you're interested, please contact Paul to get those articles. And then there's some resources, but without any further ado, I want to, move into Dr. Schultz's amazing dissertation study so that you can hear some specific data examples and samples and how she navigated the research. So beautiful teacher research study that Diana conducted. But again, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about the miscue analysis and Diana's study along with Emma research.
Thank you, Professor Kim. Thank you for being with us and supporting Diana's talk. Maybe since we are taking a short break, if there's any question left pending there, maybe we can address them now or going to, let me check the chat. No. So we will move on to, oh, yes, JP Sang, please go ahead. Welcome back first, and please let us, we cannot hear you.
Trying to get my microphone turned on.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I'm not familiar with Zoom. This is a good platform too. No complaints. Yeah. As I'm going through this CMS, it's really fun. I gotta say, more interesting than I thought it would be because I'm more interested in like the 4 subfields of linguistics. So this grabbed me more than expected. Especially since I had an old psychiatrist friend. Alas, he died of COVID in 2020. And he was a huge advocate of an approach called choral reading, which he defined as you sit the kid down to where you can both see the text, and this is an individual thing, and I understand it can be done like a chorus in a classroom. And you point at the words with a stylus or kind of something and say, you say the word when I do, and when you can, say the word before I do. So I'll venture a wild guess and say that a kid who's taught that way would be even more word focused. And then I have the same wonderment about phonics. Phonics approach does that.
I will touch on that in my presentation.
Very good.
That's a big issue that's gonna be, that pretty much drove my research.
Very good. Looking forward to hearing it.
Okay, so then thanks a lot for priming us on that, and we'll allow Diana to give us more details.
Thank you, Koomi, for an awesome intro. Okay, let me.
And by the way, Professor Kim will need to attend another meeting in about half an hour, I think, if I'm not wrong. So she apologizes in advance for leaving sometimes during Diana's talk. But thanks again, Professor Kim, for being with us today.
Thank you so much, and I apologize in advance for that.
No worry about it.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, just 1 second, because it won't show my PowerPoint in the window. It showed one. Let me hit refresh. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I'm.
Well, maybe while Diana's
yeah, take a little break.
Professor Kim, just a curiosity. I'm not. I have to admit, I'm not very familiar with Ken Goodman's work. So I was just curious. You talked about him spending some time with Chomsky and working together on his model. So I'm pretty curious, how do linguists, and especially generative linguists working in generative grammars, how do they receive that, let's say, this assumption of reading as a universal process, I mean, I would assume they would have some objections to it, right?
Okay, so first I thought the same thing, right? The universal, but then
Yeah.
Ken Goodman specifically talks about in terms of the socio-cognitive strategies and language cueing systems, regardless of the languages we use. So, we're using semantic, syntactic, and the graphophonic cueing system to navigate text. And then as human beings, we scan, right? So we sample the text, we make predictions, we make inferences, we just confirm our predictions. And then sometimes we self-correct. So again, I think he is referring to those two specific areas to navigate, but not the same way we're reading or anything like that. But in terms of the language cueing systems and socio-cognitive strategies, how we integrate those aspects. And then also he learned, well, I think he and Chomsky talked about how language is a tentative process. It's very tentative and selective process. Yep. Yeah.
So it's more like using more basic processes that could be universal in order to navigate this task we call reading. Maybe.
Right.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. Meanwhile, Diana,
Sure.
ready? So
Yes.
the floor is yours.
Thank you. So my study focused on understanding the early literacy development of primary students through the application of MISCU analysis. I am a reading specialist, a reading intervention teacher in a public school. So every day I work with readers who do not perform based on the grade level expectations. And my work with them and our pedagogical approaches to teaching reading was what drove me to take a deeper look into this. So it's my everyday work and my life. Before I start, I'd like to go just over a few key terms that I'm going to be using. I know it's a different system here, so I want to make sure I'm not just that everyone understands some of the things that I'll be talking about. So our response to intervention, or what we call RTI, is a three-tier model that we use in the U.S. education system that is meant to identify students with learning disabilities. The tier 1 students, or which is considered a primary intervention, are the students who just work and receive classroom instruction from their teacher. In tier 2, they work with either teachers or interventionists several times a week in small groups, focusing on the skills that are targeted, that they need more practice with. And in tier 3 is the most intensive, are the most students that with which I work. It's a very intensive specialized supplemental instruction where I work in 30-minute sessions, daily sessions with students in a separate setting. So they work in a pull-out session, we call it, where they are coming out of the classroom and work in a smaller group in a different space. And it's a more intense intervention. The RTI students are the students who are targeted for supplemental instruction. I work mostly with tier 2 and tier 3 students. The MISCUs, Koomi already went over it. The MISCUs are those unexpected responses that readers produce when they read orally. MISCU analysis is the analytical procedure that involves, looking at MISCUs. We look at their quality as well as their quantities. And they give us an understanding of how readers read, understand the process, and they kind of show us what readers know, what their language concepts are, what their literacy concepts are. So their main source of data. Koomi already talked about EMMA. Retrospective MISCU analysis is a method that I used in my study, which involves a conversation between an experienced reader, which could be a teacher or other students, and the students about what they do as they read. So they involve not a scripted model, but just a series of questions as readers examine their MISCUs. Like I asked them, did your MISCU make sense? Did it sound right? Did it look like the word on the page? Did you correct it? Should you have corrected it? Why? So it kind of, it's an informal conversation focused on the MISCUs that provides a lot of insights into what the readers are thinking and how they navigate text as they read. Emergent literacy is just one of the theories that I used in my theoretical framework that focuses on the early processes of literacy development, which guides our reading pedagogy in childhood education. And then the funds of knowledge, which also Koomi talked about, it's just the knowledge and the cultural knowledge and the knowledge about the world that children have. And it's an important thing that children bring to school with them and to their meaning-making processes. And because we are all different and because children are from different cultures, children bring different funds of knowledge to school. So that's something that we like to use as some of the building blocks in the teaching process.
May I?
Yes.
Thank you. Funds of knowledge, this is real quick. Funds of knowledge seems to resemble what a semanticist would call the common ground. Am I correctly discerning that?
Yes and no, because I think what funds of knowledge means, I don't know if they're necessarily common ground, because a child that comes from a different culture may have different funds of knowledge about the world, about family structure, about interactions, about customs, than maybe a child in a different culture. So funds of knowledge refer to everything we know when we come to school from just being social beings. And it can involve just regular cultural norms, linguistic norms, knowledge of the world around you. And because our students are so diverse, each child brings different funds of knowledge. Stephen gave the example of his son, who he's been reading to ever since he was since he was a baby. So he's going to come in with different funds of knowledge and different literacy knowledge than maybe a child who grew up on their parents' farm until they started first grade. So funds of knowledge is pretty much just the basic information that children bring with them as they read, as they think of the text, and they interact with the text and the world. Does that make sense? So what was the problem with that prompted me to conduct this study? In my work with students, I always kind of reflect on the theoretical connections to my practice, and how what we do matches what theory tells us we should do. In the past few years in public education, not just in Maryland, but across several states, the policies began to change, and the reading pedagogy became politicized. With the new policies, we are using a lot of phonics-based screeners to identify students who need extra support in readings, or students who are not considered on level with reading. And because of the screeners that we are forced to use, we are over-identifying a whole population of students that are labeled as deficient, that are struggling, that need intervention. And it's a very deficit-centered paradigm. And the reason it's problematic is because it forces teachers to assess and evaluate students' reading based on a just set of small isolated skills. And because they're viewed as sequential and linear, if kids don't meet those standards, if they can read certain sounds or blend certain sounds or segment or manipulate or have basic phonemic awareness or phonics skills, they're considered struggling. So because we use solely their phonics skills to sort of place them in those 3 RTI tiers, it's problematic because the focus of instruction now, because of the new legislation, has switched to phonics. And we take our readers who are in the most need and we give them instruction in one isolated skill when they would need to work on way more than that. So the strong push towards phonics was what prompted me into looking at how students make sense of text, how do they navigate, and is phonics really the end all be all? So my research question was, how do primary grade students who are receiving the RTI services develop and reflect on their literacy knowledge and reading process? I looked at how they experience and conceptualize reading, and I used retrospective miscue analysis, where I ended up talking to them about their miscues. And I also worked with teachers and investigated how miscue analysis impacts their understanding of how their students are developing, and not just their general education students, but particularly their students who are receiving RTI services, who are already placed in that deficit, under that deficit lens, with focus on what are the things they cannot do. So because of this focus on the coding that our education world has kind of been taken over, I think this study, is important because our county began an implementation of one of those programs that focuses on teaching phonics and phonemic awareness as part of the intervention, and gave up other programs that touched on vocabulary development, language development, comprehension. So these views in education in the United States, we often compare them to a pendulum, because education is so politicized. The way we teach reading becomes politicized. And some people see reading as a more complex process and with different areas that intermingle that need to be touched on. And some people see reading as a sequential process that, you need to learn certain skills in a certain order, and you cannot move forward until you master it, so you can become a proficient reader. So there's a very public but they used to call it the reading wars, where different approaches to reading pedagogy are not are supported by different groups of people. As to the review of literature, I'm not going to bore you with it. Koomi went over went over Goodman's reading model. I looked at early literacy development theories. I reviewed a lot of miscue research in the context of classrooms. I reviewed some miscue analysis studies. And the reason I chose miscue analysis and retrospective miscue analysis is because it frames reading as thinking. And one of the issues with our students, if you ask them, what does it mean to read, they will talk about how reading is sounding out and saying words. So none of them really mention meaning, but I'm going to go a little bit over that. So as to my methodology.
So Dana,
Yes.
if I may, just a quick question to see if I understand right. You mentioned this war between different
theories, the reading wars. Yes,
should be taught. Yes.
Yes.
So, are there then these two? Can you think of these two as two positions, like miscue analysis on one side, and this phonics way of doing reading teaching, like another type of?
I don't necessarily see them as that. I think that every approach capitalizes on different ways to teach reading. And I think we need a more holistic approach. And
Yeah. So my question is, are these different approaches to reading, teaching, and literacy?
They are different, yes.
Okay.
One is top down and one is sort of bottom up. So one vision thinks we need to learn letters and phonics, and then only after kids can decode everything do you work on vocabulary development. Only after they have reading fluency do you work on comprehension. So they see it working on sequential skills. The other side, the whole language approach, is that all these different aspects and variables that enter into the reading process can develop at the same time. They develop differently in each child based on their funds of knowledge, based on their cognitive differences, and they don't need to be taken apart and taught as different skills in isolation. That we can touch on all of that by exposing children to text, and that we don't have to wait. You can focus on teaching comprehension even if the child cannot read everything independently. The other model is more of a, no, they need to learn all of this and then we expose them to text. So there's a view, just a difference in views of how reading should be taught. The skill-based view, the issue with that is that it's not very inclusive of students with different linguistics, cultural differences. It's not as inclusive of students with, articulation differences, cognitive differences. So it's more restrictive. It's more, maybe it works better for English speakers. It maybe works better for children without learning differences, while a more holistic approach can allow each child to work on what they need to and not forces them to just try it in just one single way. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I was just trying to underline this difference between these different approaches, because like I talked to Diana about this before, and I just want to mention this. Like, coming from some cultural backgrounds, like my Romanian background, my Spanish background, it's let's not say shocking, but it's a surprise to hear that there are several approaches to reading, because of course we have languages and we have writing systems in Romanian and Spanish where you have more or less like a phonemic transcription. So teaching reading with phonics makes sense in our case. But I was just thinking that it does not make
in English,
much sense, or not necessarily much sense for English, for French, maybe, where you have
more exceptions and rules
between orthography and phonemes. So yeah, just thank you for clarifying that.
And the issue that we have with that is that they call it the science of reading. However, it's not very rooted in science. And this focus is not very comprehension focused. And the ultimate goal of reading should be comprehension. But because by teaching this way, you can assess this way and you can get measurable, scorable reading scores that you can be accountable for to get state testing, it's much harder with comprehension because comprehension is more sort of objective when you score it. So there's an issue because they see these as measurable skills, but they are not directly correlated with the student's understanding of the text. And because of this change in legislation, we are forced to focus on those phonics drills and repetition and behavioristic approaches to teaching reading rather than more holistic. Let's put a book in their hand, let's talk and teach them how to think about it, and then teach the other things around it. So going back to my setting and context, I touched about it. I work in a Title I school, which is one of the schools I mean, my school used to be a Title I school. About 70% of the students received free and reduced meals. So you could see kind of the pattern in the socioeconomic status of the students. We're a small school, but we have 900 students, and we do use the RTI 3-tier intervention model. I did conduct my study during the pandemic, so it was a little interesting to teach via Zoom and teach online, but I was fortunate that I was still able to have 7 students participants, and that the 6 teachers agreed to be part of my participants. Excuse me. So my students were in between 1st and 3rd grade, a mix of tier 2 and 3 students. Teachers were 6 teachers with various years of experience, from 4 years to 33. So it was good to have a mix of approaches and perceptions. And historically, in the U.S. education, we have this what we call pendulum swing, where ever so many years, what we do, someone comes up with the best approach, and we have to throw everything out that we've done up to that point and fully embrace the new approach to teaching reading. So sometimes it's kind of like throwing the child out with the bathwater. So instead of keeping what works and adding and complying with the new expectations, we tend to throw everything out and jump on a different boat, which may not always be the best thing for students. As to my data sources, I did interviews with students. The basic reading interview kind of touched on the students' attitudes towards reading, the way they view themselves as readers. How do they see reading? I use developmental checklists. I did complete the reading miscue inventory, which means I collected oral samples from each child, 5 oral samples. I had them retell what they read after they read the story. The unaided retelling is them sharing everything they remembered from the story after they read it. The aided retelling involved me asking them additional questions to probe their understanding of the text and allowing them to use the book to sort of support their answers. I completed 5 individual retrospective miscue analysis sessions with each child, which means I sat down with each child, we listened to their oral reading samples, and we discussed miscues in 5 different sessions. So we discussed anywhere between 3 to 5 miscues in each session with each child. I also gathered some of their work samples from my reading intervention sessions and some of their classroom work. For the teachers, I also conducted interviews. I had 5 teacher group sessions where the teachers discussed their readers. We discussed miscue samples. We looked at some Emma videos. We talked about the reading process. I also conducted teacher observations. I looked at some of their lesson plans. And after each group session, they submitted a reflection memo where they kind of ruminated on what the topic of each session was. And of course, I kept my research journal, and I used a series of artifacts. For the teacher group sessions, and the first one, I pretty much talked to them about miscue analysis. I asked them what they knew about it. We have used it in the past in some of our assessment documents. So we did look at their miscues in some of those reading inventories that we use to identify where the child is based on the grade level expectations. We also reviewed the reading models. So we looked at several theoretical reading models. We talked about the different types of miscues, their impact on comprehension, and how do they see the miscues and how they use miscues in their work with, in their everyday work with their children. In the third session, I did share an Emma video of an RTI reader, one of the videos I collected as my pilot study. We talked about the reading process. We discussed some of those miscues. In the fourth session, teachers brought miscue samples from their students. I also had teachers record themselves. I gave them a challenging text and I made them analyze their own miscues. So that was really fun to kind of get them some insights and get them thinking, you know, how a child feels when they read a challenging and difficult text. So that was a fun session. And the fifth group, we followed through with the retrospective miscue analysis of their own miscues. So we discussed student miscues, but we also sort of put the teachers in the, I also put the teachers in the kids' shoes, and I picked a text that they read, and they analyzed their own miscues. As to my data analysis, I used the miscue analysis procedure 3, which is one of the analysis methods that Ken Goodman developed. It's a very comprehensive way to understand, you know, a reader's awareness of the linguistic structures of grammar, their schema, what they know, and how they use the 3 cueing systems. I selected both fiction and nonfiction texts. I used full text. I used authentic text. They were usually texts that the children haven't read before. I collected oral reading samples of students reading those books, and I'll show you a table with some of the things. I transcribed. I used a typescript of each book. I numbered the sentences, lines, page numbers. I marked the typescript, and I marked each type of miscue. I've marked omissions, so what the children left out, substitutions, which is whatever word they produced instead of the word that was in the text, insertions, if they added something that was not in the text. I marked repetitions. I marked their pauses as they were reading orally. I marked non-words, because a lot of the times their substitutions can be real words, or sometimes they can be nonsense. I marked repeated miscues and their self-corrections. So when I analyzed these typescripts, I looked at their miscues. I looked at whether they're syntactically acceptable, semantically acceptable, and whether they're meaning changing or not. So aside from looking at the individual miscues and their types of miscues, I also looked at, do they change meaning at the sentence level? Do they change meaning, you know, at the word level? Are there miscues with graphic similarity? So I looked sort of quantitatively and qualitatively at these miscues, but I also cross-referenced them with their retelling. So I analyzed their retellings to be able to kind of get an idea of how do these miscues impact their understanding of the text. And this is just an example of how I tallied just the miscue. So this is just an example of my miscue tally form. So you can see I had a first grade kiddo, the 5 texts they read, the numbers of miscues that I tallied, so an overall number. I looked at their self-corrections. I looked at whether their miscues have no meaning change, if they have partial meaning change, or if they do change the meaning. I looked whether they have graphic similarity, so how many letters in the word they produced match what the word that they substituted. So as you can see, most of the miscues have high graphic similarity. So that kind of shows us that they were over-relying on just graphophonics. As to my data analysis, I did conduct 3 cycles of analysis. I looked at patterns. I looked at similarities. I organized the data in different categories. I looked at the major codes that emerged and how they are related, and it was a lot of work. I'm not going to go into, I used in vivo as well, so that helped a lot, the software that helped me organize my data, and it made it easier for me to see the themes and patterns. But I also sort of developed my own tables that allowed me to look across data and triangulate the different data sources. And of course, the typescripts, I had transcribed all the interviews, looking for the common themes and patterns in those as well. and I did several several cycles of coding. I did have a lot of data sources. I'm not going to go over this. I did get an IRB approval. We all know that it takes jumping through 7 circles of fire to do research with children because they're considered vulnerable population, but I was lucky enough to be able to get approval. I'm going to move back into the findings because those are technicalities, but if you have questions, stop me. So I found some of my major findings were that our RTI kiddos were able to have great insights as they reflected on their self-perception and reading experiences. One of the major findings was that. I also got a lot of insights into how they developed awareness of their reading conceptualization through that retrospective miscue analysis, through the chance of talking and analyzing their own miscues. The teachers also reflected on their RTI readers, but also on how they view the reading process and how they understand it as they got different sort of insights through looking at students' miscues. So they engage in miscue analysis. They also analyze their own miscues. So it did prompt them to be more reflective on their own reading, but also reading as a process and their pedagogical approaches to teaching reading and literacy. And then the big revaluing process, which was, as a teacher, I see it as the biggest win. I'm going to go in a little bit more detail on each of the themes that emerged. So the way they reflected on their self-perceptions and reading experiences, most of the RTI readers are very hesitant to see themselves as good readers because they are children who don't feel very successful, children who often are unable to read grade level text or the text that they read in the classroom. They don't feel very successful and they don't see themselves as proficient. So a lot of the data showed that some of them were very hesitant to call themselves good readers because I would plainly ask them, are you a good reader? Some of the students that I've already been working with, so Joe, who is one of the participants, said that reading, he saw himself not as a good reader. He said, at first when I tried to read, I didn't know the words. So he's sort of connecting his ability to read to his ability to decode individual words. So he sees reading as, knowing words. Another one of my students shared that his mom's a good reader because she reads chapter books. So while he still said he's not a good reader, he was like, I don't know if I'm a really good reader, but I think good readers should read chapter books. So they see reading as like good readers as being able to handle high volume text, because chapter books for literally emerging readers are like a major win. All of my students, when they start reading chapter books, they make sure to let me know all the time, I got a chapter book, I'm reading chapter books now. So it's sort of the ultimate goal of reader for the littles. So they see reading as having that stamina to handle large amounts of text. 3 of my participants did say that they saw themselves as good readers, but they still said that that they don't know a lot of words and they'd like to get better at reading longer text and not messing up words. So they did tie their perception of readers in their ability to accurately decode and to accurately identify and read words. In a lot of the interviews, when I asked them if, are you a good reader, why, or are you a bad reader, or do you consider yourself a good reader? If they said no, I still asked why. One of the students said, I'm a good reader because I know a lot of words. So again, it shows us how word-centered they are. He said he usually doesn't get words wrong, and he named his sister as a good reader because she knows all the words that he didn't. So he's one of those kiddos who runs to his sister and like, hey, what's this word? So he thinks that because he doesn't know a word in a story he reads, he is not as smart. And because his sister is able to decode it, that, she's a better reader. One of my participants, who's a bilingual third grade student, also named her sister as a good reader because she reads chapter books. So again, it's this idea of high volume reading, that, you know, knowing all the words is what good readers do. Another thing that indicated how word focused they are is when I asked another one of the participants, "Are you a good reader?" She said, "I'm a good reader because I try to sound out the words and just keep trying." So sounding out is sort of pervasively coming up in all the interviews and all my talk to them. So most of these emerging readers have their understanding that reading is sort of dependent on the ability to use phonics, to use word identification, and it doesn't always, I mean, no, none of them really mentioned meaning making. Also, that required relentless and perseverance. Some of the students said that they're good readers because they try hard. So most of the students perceived good reading as accurate reading. And as I mentioned, not all of them really focused on meaning making. When I asked all of them what they'd like to do better in the reading, again, the same thing showed up. One of them said, "I want to not mess up words. I want to pronounce more words. I want to get good at words they don't know," which again points to viewing reading as just saying words without not really being aware that meaning is important. Some of them did share that they'd like to get better reading books, but they also saw readers as being good readers that read any text without any constraints, readers who don't make any miscues, readers who are able to sound out every word. And this is sort of a result of the way in which they are often instructed. Because the focus for readers in RTI is phonics and basic reading skills and phonemic awareness, and teaching these skills in isolation and focusing them on accurate decoding, it skews the way they view reading. And I know a lot of the RTI students are always like instructed to pick just a certain level of books, a certain level of complex text. Oftentimes they get artificial text that forces them to practice those phonic skills, but that text is very forced, doesn't use natural language. It's very scripted, and it's part of the curriculum that's supposed to remediate their reading problems, but it does not use authentic language, and it doesn't sound like the authentic fairy tales and books that children should read. It's very forced and artificial. So another thing that popped out is that
I'm sorry, if you,
Yes.
if you allow me a short interference.
Yes.
So, because you mentioned this change in the way they are taught to read. So these kids who participate in your study, do you know how they were taught? Were they taught in the new way? Were they taught in the old-fashioned way?
They were taught up to maybe a year before the pandemic. They were taught in a more holistic approach.
Okay.
However, the phonics approach is in the U.S. education, because it's so measurable, has always been sort of at the forefront of reading instruction. Okay. So phonics is a big piece and a big skill that we tend to overemphasize in our reading instruction because of how either we understand reading, but also mostly because it's a measurable skill. Mm. So the focus on accuracy, the focus on you know, how you apply those phonics skills to the code seems to overweigh their ability to understand what they read. So it weighs heavier in assessments because it's easier to grade.
Yeah, I understand
so historically, phonics has been overemphasized in early grades.
So you are saying it, and now it's even more.
Now it's even more because our law forces us to give extensive intervention that solely focuses on phonics.
And that's what I understood. But even so, it was interesting to see that some of those kids, their own perception of being a good reader was very much linked, as you said, to knowing words and to associate the words they know to the images they were seeing, like to the written words, which makes me think it's more of it's a way of seeing reading more not in a phonic way, right? Or
it's a word focus.
I don't understand it very well.
So they
it's
tend
just
to
their own perception of reading and how reading should work is more linked to this holistic view that you are preaching, let's say, right?
Yes. Reading is making sense of text, and what I see reading as an educator is, a child being able to understand what's on that paper, being able to talk about it, being able to make inferences about it, being able to think critically about it.
Right. So what I'm saying, that my impression is that their view on it is quite similar to what you are saying, right?
It seems like their view on it is mostly, I'm reading, I have to say the words correctly. And the issue with it is that when they read out loud, they don't monitor meaning. And I'll go into that in a little bit. They read out loud, they don't pay attention to the substitutions they make. What they say doesn't make sense, so their comprehension is often very impacted because they're so focused on meaning, on sounding out words, that they don't pay attention to what they just read and whether the word they substituted or they put together doesn't make any sense in the sentence because they're so focused on the graphophonic cueing system.
Right.
And they need a lot of explicit instruction. They naturally tend to over-focus on print, and eye movement studies show us that. But my issue with it is that they need, aside from phonics and teaching them how to decode and teaching them letters and sounds, we also need to teach them to look at pictures. We also need to teach them to think about what they say. We also need to teach them to monitor their meaning, to make sense, to make sure that what they say makes sense, that what they read makes sense, that it sounds right, that their miscues are not meaning changing. And the issue with these kids is that a lot of the times they have so many miscues that it affects their understanding. And a lot of them don't know that they need to monitor for meaning. They don't know, they produce sentences that make no sense because they substitute a word with another one and they don't even realize it, that, I live in a house, they could read it as in I live in a horse because it looks like house, and they keep going and it doesn't even faze them that what they said, it doesn't make sense. So this is sort of the area where they're missing, and focus on phonics instruction doesn't help them with understanding reading as meaning making.
Right.
Does that make sense? So again, when I ask them about their reading strategies, what do you do when you get to a word you don't know? Most of them, again, went to words. They said, one of them said, I stretch the word out like a slinky, which is one of the strategies that we teach them when blending sounds. Stretch it out like a slinky. Amy said she sounds it out. Joe said, I spell it out, which he also meant to, it's the same thing. Like he would say it sound by sound and put the word together. So again, it shows that they're very focused on the word level rather than using other strategies. So the only thing most of them are able to identify as a reading strategy, as a meaning-making strategy, is just decoding. Amy, one of the girls, noted that she sometimes looks at the word and tries it, but pretty much the common answer is I sound it out. You ask every first grader here, what do you do when you get to a word you don't know? The standard answer, probably with like 99% accuracy, is going to be I sound it out. Two of the boy participants said that sounding out it is also a strategy. When I asked them, what do you do, if your friend gets to a word you don't know, how would you help them? And again, they said, I would sound it out. I would tell them the word. So this pervasiveness of decoding as a main strategy it's very, you know, reflected in the way in which, you know, they were taught. Because what do we all also, first thing that we do when the kids read out loud and they get to a word they don't know, the first prompt from most of the teachers is sound it out. So when I asked these students, you know, what their teachers would do if they get to a word they don't know, all 7 kids mentioned sounding it out. So again, this ties into how we teach them. What's the feedback we give them when they get to a miscue? And that's congruent with their reported strategies. So some other stuff that came out was, you know, what are some of their literacy experiences? Most of them, actually all of them reported that they love being read to. Some of them even enjoyed reading out loud. The ones who were more shy did not, but some say I like listening, but I really, really like to read. Some like talking about the text. One of the students said, I like answering the questions, and if she asks us to read, I always raise my hand. So some of them were quite motivated, and they seem to have quite positive experiences. One of the students shared that he didn't like to speak in front of the classroom. He had some articulation difficulties, but he really loved talking about the books. And he said his favorite thing was telling if a book was fiction or nonfiction, which was the only one who kind of hinted at comprehension, at thinking about the text critically. Some Brad and Bobby, they were the only 2 who kind of showed some awareness that you know, reading is more than just sounding out. And they did say that they like talking about it and thinking about the text. And they really do enjoy having those opportunities to discuss their reading. So as we engaged in these retrospective miscue analysis, where I sat with them one-on-one and let them listen to themselves reading, I picked different types of miscues, and in each session we discussed them. All students read authentic texts. I had a mix of fiction and nonfiction, and all the texts had illustrations, they had pictures, they have graphs, different text features, captions, labels. So I made sure they include, you know, what an informational text that they would typically read in real life would have, what some of the fiction books would have. In the 5 sessions that I had with each student, the first one, I started focused on the high quality miscues. And what a high quality miscue is a miscue that's not meaning changing. So doing that, I try to start on a positive note. I wanted them to focus on the things they do well and to highlight that, yes, you substituted house for home, but because it doesn't change the meaning, it's not a bad thing as long as the meaning is preserved. In the second section, I selected 2 high quality miscues and 3 partial and some low quality miscues, which were some of the miscues that had some meaning change. And using those guiding questions, I asked them, you know, did your word make sense in the sentence? Did it sound right? Did it look like the text? Should you have corrected it? Did it change the meaning? Why or why not? So I started prompting them to kind of look at their own reading and try to think, like, why do you think you made this miscue? You know, why did you think you did it? Let's write it down. You know, do they kind of look the same? Do they look different? So they had the chance to kind of think about it. Hey, why did I do that? In my third session, I used both a mix of high and low quality miscue. And the low quality miscues are the ones who are meaning changing and the ones who should be self-corrected. And I explained it to them. I explained the difference in between a high quality and a low quality miscue. And I made sure that the miscues that I selected were the ones that were more frequent in their own pattern of miscues. So each child had different patterns of substitutions. So I picked the most frequent ones to kind of help them see some of the things that they do. In the fourth session, I did pick some partial low quality miscues, but I also asked them, you know, to talk about some of their miscues, and I let them sort of lead the questions. So I started pulling back with my questions and let them listen to themselves and talk about their own miscues without me prompting them with the questions. By this time, they had already gotten used to talking about it. So it was really awesome to hear them, you know, starting to borrow some of the language and using the similar questioning format that we used in the prior session. And in the last session, I literally just gave them the iPad with the video, with the audio, and I said, you pick what we're going to talk about. So they had free roam to analyze their own reading in the last session. How did they respond to that? So in their first session, most of them view their miscues as mistakes. And I often emphasize that I like to call them miscues because mistakes make them sound like a bad thing, and miscues are a natural part of reading. I try to emphasize that they're a result of our thinking, and that they're not necessarily bad. Again, the word centeredness sort of pops out again, because when I asked him, why do you think you made that miscue? Jack said, I didn't know that word yet. I messed up and read the wrong word. I didn't know the word. So they had quite negative perceptions about making these oral reading miscues. By the second RMA session, although shy, you know, said she said the wrong word. Oh yeah, she was still quite like, she read chicken instead of children. And when I asked her, you know, well, how, you know, what do you think of your miscue? She's like, well, I read the word wrong. So again, it shows that she was still quite focused. Although she was able to self-correct as soon as she got to the end of the sentence. So although she said, oh, I said the wrong word, she didn't realize that she still got to the end of the sentence and went back and self-corrected her miscue. But instead of focusing on the things she did well, she had such a negative perception. Oh, I made a mistake. I read the word wrong. Instead of being like, hey, I read the word wrong, but I went back and fixed it. So that, you know, that shows me that she was paying attention. She was monitoring meaning. And I did make sure to point those successful behaviors in our sessions. And I did point out that, you know, smart readers go back and self-correct when what they're saying doesn't make sense. So I often prompted them to think of their own miscues differently and to see their strengths and to see what good readers do, rather than, oh, you make a mistake, you're not a good reader. No, there's good things that you do that, you know, help you navigate this text. So as we progress through these sessions, you know, my goal was to try to shift their thinking away from those word-centric perspectives. I did notice by looking at their miscues that they did use sounding out as their primary strategy. Most of the miscues had really high graphic similarity. That shows me that they were over-relying on the graphophonic cues. So a lot of the same letters were a lot of the words that they produced were very graphically similar to the words in the text. And I have it over here, how the child substituted blueberries with berries, Benson with Ben. So by looking at some of these miscues, the RTI students began to reflect on their miscues. They began to reference meaning. They started to think of their miscues in the context of not only the sentence, but the whole text. So it got them to be more aware of their own thinking processes. I did share smart miscues with them, which we like. I call high quality miscues smart miscues. And you know, when one of the participants, Brad, read "Let's take a shortcut to school" instead of "Let's take the shortcut to school," he noticed that his high quality miscue was syntactically and semantically acceptable, and it didn't change the meaning. So they began to shift their ways they see their miscues. After discussing two of his miscues with high graphic similarity, Jack just began, he was a first grader, and he just kind of started flying with it, and he started talking about his miscue. He said, "Oh, it still sounds good." So he began to show an awareness of the syntactic and semantic acceptability of his miscues. And I think he said, if you look at the example at the bottom, he says, "Oh, it was actually at," and he said that. So I said, "What do you think about that?" He said, "It still sounds good." So I tried to emphasize, your miscue made sense. That was another smart miscue because it didn't change the meaning. It didn't change the sentence. And Joe, in the other example, when he said staples, but it wasn't staples, I said, "Why do you think that happened?" And he said, "Well, they start with it the same way." So the word was stables. So he read it as staples. And I said, "Tell me more about that." And he said, "Oh, but there's no B here." So it shows how they begin to analyze their own miscues and think of whether they're meaning changing or not, or think of their graphic similarity. A lot of this discussion around their miscues not only helped them focus on the meaning, but it developed their understanding of their own thinking. So they all really enjoyed talking about their own miscues. They were like, "We don't ever get to talk about that." And they all began to notice their miscues with fewer replays. They began taking the lead on talking about the graphic similarity, talking about why they thought they made those miscues. And they were, beginning to be proud of their self-corrections, and kind of shifted the way they began to see their own reading. And I like that Cole said, "I know I miscued on it." And I loved how he sort of transformed the noun into a verb. And I asked him, "Should you have corrected it?" And I said, "Why? Why do we correct our miscues?" Because so we can understand the story. So he's showing a developing awareness that they can impact the meaning. And I emphasize we have to make sure that what we say not only makes sense and sounds right, but also it doesn't change the meaning. So teachers as well began on reflecting on their readers and reading process as they began to look at students' miscues. Where they were able, in their interviews, they viewed RTI readers as sort of students who need more practice with phonic and phonemic awareness, which kind of shows what the focus of their instruction is for these readers. Holly described RTI readers as students who focus on individual words, and that her instruction includes teaching them blends and digraphs and how letters sound. So again, those basic phonics skills that are emphasized in the instruction of the RTI readers. And one of the teachers even said, "I feel like English is very hard to teach them because, you have like the double E and it's going to make a different sound." And again, while she acknowledges that the focus is on phonics, she also acknowledges that there's not really rules that we can teach. So it can get confusing for them. Also, these students were identified as students who don't have word attack strategies, or only one of the teachers said that RTI students lack comprehension, but the other teachers were focused on their ability to decode and their ability to blend sounds and letters. So it seems like there's a pattern in how they were viewed amongst the teachers. And some of them also view students as lacking motivation, which is a very typical view of these readers. But as they engaged in analyzing their students' miscues, although they asked teachers, what's a miscue? What do you see? What are miscues? So most of them view them as errors. Most of the teachers had very little familiarity with reading models, even though a couple of them did have, like reading specialist knowledge. As we discussed the student samples, they did look at, their different types of miscues. They began reflecting on the role of miscues. Some of the students used the students' miscues. They shared that they do use their miscues to see if they're monitoring for meaning. Some of them use them as ways to discuss different reading strategies. So as we talked more about miscues, instead of viewing them as errors and unwanted things, teachers began to understand, the more we analyzed their students' miscues, they began to understand that we can use those discussions not only to learn about our students and how they navigate text, but also how to teach them different strategies and how we can use that information to enhance our instruction. I did share that I prompted teachers to read a text, The Purple Dress by O. Henry, and they read a fragment, and I picked like archaic language, and a lot of them, looked at their own miscues, and they said, oh, one of the teachers said, I didn't even know what that word was, to be honest. So I tried to sound it out. And then when I was done reading, I actually had to look it up to figure out the pronunciation and the meaning. So even teachers acknowledge that one of their main strategies is sounding out. But it was a way for them to reflect on their own reading, their own miscues, how their miscues impacted their comprehension, and what strategies they use. A lot of the times when students read or read slow, the perception is that they're not proficient readers. But as grown-ups noticed that they themselves had to go back and reread, and they read slowly, and they had to go back and use context clues, it kind of helped them understand how their students navigate text and what are some of the strategies that they are using as adults that we need sometimes to explicitly teach the children to engage in. Some teachers also reflected on their self-corrections and how they were able to gather more information from the text and self-correct later, which is something that they mentioned also that they noticed their students do. I also showed them an eye movement miscue analysis video, just like the one Koomi shared with you, and it was really fun to hear their reflections, especially related to the directionality of reading, because we tend to teach the direction of reading from left to right, but eye movement miscue analysis shows us that, reading is not linear, and, sometimes we force them to put their finger under and trace and track, and our eyes don't always follow the left to right pattern as we could see in the Emma research. Another thing that they notice is how students look at a lot of different things, and they're like, I never would have guessed that. As your eye moves across the page, the voice goes ahead of the eyes was something that another one noticed. It prompted them to think of their preconceptions about reading in the light of what they learned by watching that video. So Cora, which is one of the teachers who was teaching for about 30-something years, did reflect on how, the student used pictures in the Emma video that I shared with them. And she says, I feel like the lower readers are still not making up that connection in between pictures and text. She said, I know that the letter E makes the S sound, say its name, but they're not thinking that way. So she's talking about some phonic rules that they're teaching explicitly that the children are not applying. And she did acknowledge that this is not a one-size-fits-all, and the approach that was emphasized in our county with, we all need to do it this way, it's not beneficial to our students. So she was expressing frustration with the one-size-fits-all approach to reading instruction, where teachers are forced to do what we're told, not what works best for the kid. They all agreed that students need explicit instruction in using multiple strategies and using the language cueing system with flexibility and balance. So as they began working with RTI readers, as our sessions were continuing, they began to identify ways in which they use it. One of them said, I never look at running records the same way again. This is a reading assessment the classroom teachers had to do. They would do it to be done, but they never really looked at miscues. They have the students read 100 words, and you just look at the accuracy level. And they didn't really understand how they were supposed to use that assessment tool to gain information about the reader. But after digging into some of their examples, they began to think, wait, this is a good source of data. This is how I can use it. This is how I can learn about my kids. This is how I can talk to them about reading strategies. So some of them shared that, they began to prompt their students every time they miscued. Instead of telling them, look back and sound it out, they would ask them, did that sound right? Or one of the teachers even discussed the signal miscue with her whole group of students, which shows us that they began to bring in that knowledge and that understanding and apply it and take it into their classrooms, as we were able to just collaborate as colleagues and just discuss, hey, why are we doing this? What do these miscues tell us? What do we do with them? So yeah, it kind of shifted the way they began to think about their readers, and they really enjoyed, developing that understanding. And some of them said that understanding that miscues are a good thing to know. If we don't know what they are, the students need help with them. Miscues aren't always a bad thing. They really tell us what they need as readers. This is what a teacher shared. And if y'all remember in the beginning, they all said that, miscues are mistakes. Cora, who's one of the most experienced teachers, she's the one who taught for 33 years. She's like, I'm knowing the miscues, I'm following the miscues, but I'm able to pick out the miscues even better and make a plan for there. And then some of them even said that, if it's a miscue that doesn't change the meaning, I don't even worry about it. So instead of stopping the kid and making them fix every word, why don't we just stop them and ask them to think of the ones who are meaning changing. So it kind of prompted teachers to think about their students in the context of what they can learn about them in miscues. And the revaluing process, it's the students began to understand that their brains are working really hard, and they start to see their self-corrections, they start to see their strengths. So the way they began to see themselves, Cole said, my reading is really amazing. Or Jack ended up saying that good readers sometimes do get to words they don't know, which in the initial interview, I would ask, do you think good readers get to words they don't know? And every single one of them said no, good readers know every word. So Jack acknowledged that I do everything a smart reader does. Brad and Bobby named themselves as good readers in the post-interview because they thought their reading was good because they self-corrected often. So that shows that they're not only being aware of their effective strategies, but they also didn't see miscues as a bad thing anymore. So they both noted that they read with good expression, and they pointed how they noticed the exclamation marks and the text features and how they remembered to read the captions. So it was very empowering for them, and it gave them a chance to take autonomy of their own reading and think about it and celebrate their successes. Brad said, I didn't make any miscues and I read with expression, it's 3 exclamation marks. Or Cole began to see that he was able to fix a lot of his miscues. So while they were kind of uncomfortable listening to themselves read the first time, the more we began to talk and normalize miscues as a natural part of the reading process, they became more relaxed and invested, and they were very involved in the process of analyzing their own reading. So it did give them a different perspective, but also it made them more confident in their thinking and learning. And they began to understand that miscues are a normal part of reading, and they're a result of the strategies that we are engaged in, and they're natural in the reading process. And they were very eager to embrace this normalization. And just one of the last things I'm sharing is just a difference in between the strategies they were able to name. So in the initial interview, you could see all 7 participants, when I asked them, what do you do when you get to a word you don't know? Jack said, I try my best to sound it out. Cole said, I sound it out. Brad said, I stretch it out like a slinky. He did mention, and I just skip over the word. So he was the only one who was able to initially name more than one strategy, but the other ones is either sound it out, sound it out, sound it out, spell it out. After we discuss their miscues, and we discussed different strategies that sometimes unknowingly they were engaging in. Each one of them was able to name more than one reading strategy in the post-interview. So Jack realized that he can skip and go to the end of the sentence and, gather context clues. He did say he can still sound it out, but he also acknowledged that the pictures can help. Cole said the same, look at words that sound like it, which is using the patterns he knows to figure out new words. He also noticed that he can look at pictures, look at the glossary. Some of them understood that it's okay to keep going on, and then go back and see what the word is, or looking at pictures. Several of them mentioned looking at pictures. Let's see. Amy, she did say she's going to look at other words and see what letter and it makes a word. So she's, again, using the patterns of the words that she knows. She was English as a second language, so her expression was not as fluent at times, but she did use, chunking and recognizing parts of a word when she was trying to figure out words she didn't know. And she did mention that she covers up the word and you see a word that you know. So that was something that she was often using, her ability to recognize the patterns in some of the spelling. So they became more aware of their strategies, and they began to see how, what are some of the things they do well, and they had a more positive outlook towards their own reading. Cole said it's important to fix miscues, and I asked him, do you think I should do this with other students and let them hear themselves and discuss their miscues? And Cole said yes, because it's important to fix miscues, and they need to know that if it still makes sense what you say, it doesn't count as a miscue. Brad says it's important because now I know that if I make a mistake, it's not bad. Cole said that he noticed that he fixed a lot of his miscues and that his reading is really amazing. So from the kiddos who thought that, they're not as smart or not as proficient as everybody else, being able to talk about their own miscues was a powerful tool for them. It was the same for teachers that kind of shifted the way they saw their RTI readers, and they began to see them as more hardworking readers and see the things they do well and make sure they encourage them to do that and continue to scaffold their thinking as well, not just the basic decoding. The teachers also reflected on their students' comprehension and accuracy. They looked at, what they see their RTI kids doing. Although they think many of them lack the coding skills and strategies, some of them take the time to over decode and go letter by letter, others word call based on their first letter. So they did notice that their students are word focused. But she acknowledged that it's super important to understand, each individual reader and learner's needs and challenges. So they began to reflect more on their students and their practice. And again, some of them thought that initially they thought their students weren't trying to figure out the words. They didn't know because they were just getting the beginning sounds correct. But after watching eye movement videos, they realized that they're doing a lot to read. So I think just talking about student miscues, it helped teachers understand what a complex process is and reading is and learning how to read. And it kind of helps us adjust how we approach that and what sort of feedback we give to students. Again, teachers became more understanding of the value of their response to the RTI students. So it made them more attentive to the feedback we give. A lot of the times we don't have enough wait time for students, and we tend to rush them or feed them the word if they get to a word that they're stuck. However, a lot of the times students need to just pause to think, and the eye movement video shows that when a student pauses, their eyes are scanning the text, they're looking back, they're trying to gather information, and those pauses are natural and there are thinking time. So during the last teacher session, each of the teacher was able to share a lot of strengths of their RTI readers, while in the beginning, they were more focused on the things they were unable to do, on the skills they were lacking. So it helped shift the deficit, because they were so conditioned to focus on those skills that the kids were lacking. So by looking at their miscues, it just kind of gave teachers different avenues to see some of the strengths and see some of the areas that they need to work on. So I'm not going to go into the discussion. Obviously, it has a lot of implications for reading pedagogy. Obviously, we need to look more into future research. I think, maybe including more diverse students, using bilingual texts, including more diverse participants. But this study gave me a deeper appreciation for what the students do and the work of the students and the teachers who try to teach them. So it highlighted the unique strengths of each reader, and they made those strengths visible to me and the other teachers. So it was a great tool, not just for assessment, but also for instruction, for strategy development. And it helped, reclaim reading as a meaningful, lifelong process. So it has to be a meaningful and meaning-centered process. Okay, if you have any questions, I hope I didn't.
Well, thank you, Diana, for this very interesting presentation. I mean, I can. First thing I would say, just I see how passionate you're about it, and I think it's very, very clear that it's also very clear that you have a very pedagogical purpose, let's say, in mind, because starting from, as you said, you're using miscue instead of mistakes, and all the things you've done for the kids themselves to
Cred că puteți schimba în română, că văd că suntem numai noi.
Well, I will have this podcast mindset, because, as I said,
I forgot your
some of the
recording.
people actually apologized they had to leave, but thinking that some of them might come back and hear the recording or look at the recording, let's continue in English. And so I was saying that it is clear that it's a very pedagogical mindset you're having, and that makes total sense. And I guess the findings you have are very important. So, well, if Andrea has a question, because I think only is in the call now. If not, or while she's thinking, I would quickly go looking on the chat, because there are some, I mean, 2 or 3 questions or comments there, and maybe we can address them.
Yeah.
So Alexandra H, who had to leave earlier, said, "Does the ADHD font work?" I think she was mentioned. She referred to the Emma research and the way the saccades and all that. So she said the font where a few letters of each word are written in bold.
I don't know if I'm not aware of any studies that have used that particular type of font. No, usually I don't think.
If I get this right, I think she refers to possible differences between how the sites jump from one part of the other of the text in the case of let's say typical text and the ADHD font.
I'm not sure, since we're not technically looking at every letter. I want to say that I don't know if the font is necessarily going to make a difference, other than maybe drawing your attention to content words. So I'm not very familiar with what that font entails. and if it's meant to draw the reader to the content words, because we tend to fixate on those words. I know proficient readers only pause on like 30-40% of the words. So we rely more on linguistic predictions other than sounding out. So that's why our eyes go back and forth, because we're predicting, and then our eyes are just confirming or disconfirming. And if we say something doesn't make sense, we look back or we look at the picture. So we use other cues to make sense of the text. So I don't know if it necessarily would make a difference. I can't really answer because I'm not familiar with what that font is meant to highlight.
Yeah.
So, but they have used Emma for different types of readers, for different ability readers. I had, one of the students who came to the Emma lab was like had an individualized education plan. So it was a student who had like different learning needs. But I think the process is somehow universal. We all navigate it in the same way. The older we are, the fewer words we fixate. The more proficient we are, the fewer words we look at. And I think we notice that as readers anyway, as grown-ups, as being aware. So Emma does show that those young emerging readers are so hyper-focused on text that most of the times they don't know how to use any other cues. And my research also showed that. And Emma shows that, they don't look at pictures. They're focused on print. They get to a word they don't know. They just fixate on that word and they try to sound it out. So it just kind of shows how emerging readers are navigating, and it shows us how different ability readers, what are some of the things that we do. And while there's certain similarities, proficient readers are more efficient and effective. So they tend to do that a little faster than emerging readers. But it does give us a lot of insights, and it demystifies a lot of the preconceptions about reading, such as, we read left to right, and we look at every letter, and some of the new science of reading that's been very politicized in our political climate has actually been citing demystified studies from the 70s. Now we have cameras that can capture 1,400 frames per second. I know Koomi's is 10,000, it's so 1,000, but we have higher speed cameras now, and they cite research that is dated. They cite research that has not been updated, and they address it in the science of reading, which is erroneous, and it sort of supports things that are not always very constructive pedagogically, just because they're attaching it to a political agenda. So as teachers, we all know what our kids need, and we just need some autonomy and to let us do what's best for the kids. And a lot of the times we're forced by the policies to do things that are not always constructive. So that's one of the issues with the pendulum in education.
So, Alexandra, there you go. That's the best answer we have for what we could make of your question, if you're listening to this later. Then it's getting a bit, yes, Koomi apologizing to have to leave. Stephen offering, I think Finn is his son, right?
Yes, I named him. He also attended my dissertation
He
defense.
also gave us another example, and using his example, I would just add a comment I had together with the question. So, because you did some sort of analysis of those miscue, you mentioned like high quality, low quality miscue.
Yeah.
Do you have you done an analysis, or is there any typology of miscues? And I'm thinking more linguistically, like maybe thinking on the type of miscue and the type of reasons that might lay behind. Like you mentioned, sometimes it's an orthographical similar form. So they are homographs, let's say.
Yeah.
Sometimes they even sound similar. They are homophones. So is there any kind of typology of these miscues in these terms?
Yeah, well, we look.
So, is there like a tendency to have more miscues based on similar orthographical form, or?
Or yes, so because a lot of the emergent readers are so focused on print, the majority of their miscues not only are substitutions, so they replace the word on the page with a different word, but they have the word that they replace it with has high graphic similarity. So they say the first few letters and then they just put a word that, you know, maybe they didn't decode it till the end, or maybe that they just thought of that. But the issue with that is that they're not always, what they say doesn't always make sense. So yes, we call those, you know, those high graphic similarity miscues show us that they are more focused on the graphophonics. So those are the miscues that they make when they focus so hard on decoding that they don't think what would make sense in there, because they put so much energy into sounding each sound out, and a lot of the times the patterns don't match, so you can't sound out a lot of the English words, that they're working so hard on that their energy goes into decoding that word, and they completely forget what they read up to that point, or they, you know, whatever word they figure out it is, they don't always monitor to make sure it makes sense.
Yeah.
And by focusing them on meaning, then we can prompt them to go back and look and self-correct.
Yeah. And related to that, now that what I'm going to say now, it's just an opinion and an intuition I have, and I guess we could think of ways of testing this experimentally, but my intuition is that many, if not the majority of these cases of the miscues, have to do with frequency of use. Professor Kim mentioned earlier that we are not always reading what we see, but sometimes what we partially think that we are seeing. And that makes, I mean, for me, that means that we sometimes read what we predict. And I think that children possibly read what they predict. And since prediction is very much based on memory, that means
knowledge of
what I'm saying is that we tend to predict things with more frequency. I mean, we tend to predict with more frequency those things that we were exposed more frequently to.
Yes, absolutely.
So all the examples actually that I have seen seems to be like that, like reading chicken instead of children, or stables instead of stables.
Yes, because they weren't familiar with the word stable.
Thinking of it in like neurocognitive terms, that would be very easily explained in terms of how different let's say relational linguistic networks are being activated and primed, actually. I mean, after seeing like the first part of the word, you know, probably a highly frequently activated network can be activated by partial activation, you know. So then you suddenly have the response of a word that has been used a lot and stuff like that.
Yeah. And also the quality of the miscue changes as they read the text and as they gather information. So while in the beginning of the text, you know, they can make certain miscues, after several pages, a lot of them are able to self-correct, because they're like, oh, that word was waves, not water, or that word, because they begin to gather information from the text, and they realize that, you know, there's probably, you know, better things that fit there. So it is interesting, and I'm really curious, you know, what connections, and I'm sure some of the processes that we see, you probably have a sort of more neuro-linguistic explanation for, and I know there's huge overlap probably in how they navigate language, and especially with our, you know, huge diversity, and the fact that not everyone's a native English speaker here, and not everyone hears and produces the same sounds. And I noticed that even I, as a non-native speaker, it's hard for me to discriminate certain sounds. And I just can't hear the difference. And I know my students don't either. So this phonics-based approach is not always the most conducive for diverse learners. Kids need a little bit of everything, but for us to be forced to use this for everybody, it's not fair, because the kids who need other approaches the most are forced into one that's so narrow that only works for kids who can articulate sounds correctly, who have the English as a first language, who, you know, understand and master the English language, vocabulary, syntax, you know. So of course it's easier for somebody to predict a text when it's in their native language and it talks about things they know, that when you're from a different culture, your language has a different structure, you know, your adjectives go before after the nouns. So it's different, and it's harder for some of those kids sometimes to learn by the same approaches. So
yeah.
By looking at their miscues, we can kind of identify patterns. Like I can notice with English language learners, they drop endings, they drop, you know, articles, but as long as they get the meaning, I don't see them as necessarily, you know, you need to read every word correct. Like as long as you make sense and you get the gist of it, it's okay if you can't articulate something correctly, or if you drop an S because you're not used to this type of plural, or, you know, the verb, subject verb agreement, or whatever that comes from, you know, not being as familiar with the language. So.
Yes. So Diana, thanks so much again for being with us today, tonight, depending on the time. And for everybody watching this later, watching the recording, if you are doing any kind of research related to reading, don't hesitate to contact Diana. Don't hesitate to contact me. I'll put you in contact. Actually, as you know, I will send some info after the meeting. I will put there also the contacts. And again, thanks a lot. I'm pretty sure you could be talking about the subject days on end,
yes.
And I'm pretty sure we will talk again about this sometime
yes,
soon.
I would love to.
So again, thank you so much, and I wish you a very nice day.
Thank you. I'm off. Yay.
All right.
No,
Bye-bye.
Papa.